Honourable Ministers. It is such an honour to be able to speak to this incredibly distinguished audience today, and I wanted to thank Vera Songwe for the invitation. I wanted to pick up where Vera and the Minister, Honourable Minister from Ghana, left off. It is quite true that the advanced economies have been able to respond to this crisis with whatever it takes. And most developing countries have only been able to respond with whatever they can afford. Now, the availability of SDRs and potential recycling of those to developing countries is a potential opportunity to deliver a better recovery. What I want to focus my remarks on this morning is that this opportunity is one in which we can define a new social contract in Africa. And I'm going to draw on some findings from a book that I just published this month called What We Owe Each Other, a New Social Contract. And the opportunity that I'm describing comes from the fact that many African countries are in the midst of transitioning from a social contract that relies heavily on families to support the young, the old, the sick, and the unemployed, to one where society helps to carry some of those responsibilities in exchange for everyone contributing to the common good through work in the formal sector and through paying taxes for as long as possible. I know that those words would ring well in an audience of finance ministers. The goal would be to get a better balance of security and opportunity across the continent, drawing on the lessons from this crisis. So let me start with security. And I want to start with what worked well. In many African countries during the pandemic, there was considerable security provided by cash transfer schemes. And Vera showed a very interesting chart to show how cash transfer schemes were rolled out and got cash into the poorest families, and those were expanded rapidly across the continent during this crisis. And some increased those amounts because they knew poor households would be adversely affected. Having that cash transfer delivery infrastructure in place was hugely beneficial for protecting the most vulnerable. And we know from hundreds of randomized controlled trials around the world that those cash transfers are effective at improving nutrition, school attendance, and productivity. But the crisis also underlined the importance of achieving universal healthcare across Africa. And here, the track record is more mixed, but the objective is clear. The World Health Organization recommends that an essential health package would cost about 5% of GDP and should be universally available and consist of things like prenatal care, immunizations, treatment of communicable diseases like pneumonia, tuberculosis, and COVID, bed nets against malaria, and treatment of cardiovascular illness, and access to medical care. Many developing countries are choosing a two-tier model whereby the poor and those in the informal sector are covered through the public healthcare system managed by the government and paid for through general taxation, sometimes complemented by contributions from households. And those employed in the formal sector, meanwhile, contribute through payroll taxes to an insurance-based system, and the better off rely on the private market. But the pandemic has shown us that we can do much more digitally than we ever thought possible, just like events like today. Many developing countries will never be able to achieve universal healthcare based on the prevailing model in which medical interventions take place in dedicated facilities overseen by highly trained doctors. Digital technologies open up the possibility of completely new models of telemedicine, of patients having access to high quality information and controlling their own medical records, using wearable devices to monitor vital signs like temperature, blood pressure, and oxygen saturation at home at very low cost, and even using artificial intelligence for diagnosis and robotic delivery of many procedures. In isolated parts of Rwanda and Tanzania, drones are already being used to deliver vaccine and blood. In future, it will be possible to receive treatment from doctors or healthcare professionals located anywhere in the world. And one effect of that may be to reduce the pressure on healthcare workers migrating in pursuit of greater earnings. So just as Africa leapfrogged to mobile phone technology without ever building a fixed line telephone network, I think there's a real opportunity for Africa to use digital technologies to leapfrog to a better, more cost-effective system of universal healthcare. Now, let me turn to the theme of opportunity. With the exception of a few countries, I think it's fair to say that the economic consequences for Africa have been more severe than the health ones. The first recession in a quarter century, limited fiscal space, and high debt levels constraining government action, and continuing uncertainty about how to create livelihoods for a growing young population. Again, let me start with what has gone well. Almost every country in Africa has achieved universal primary education and is on its way to achieving universal secondary education. That is a huge achievement. And as many girls as boys are in school in most countries, contributing to lower population growth and even higher levels of female employment. There are challenges around educational quality, disruptions caused by the pandemic, and questions about how to use digital technologies more effectively. But here again, I think there are some incredible opportunities for Africa to leapfrog to blended learning models that would be both cost-effective and higher quality. But future growth will increasingly be digital. And as the very good issues paper prepared by the Economic Commission for Africa for this event says, Africa will need to invest in digital skills, digital infrastructure, and the middleware to create growth opportunities in agriculture, manufacturing, and increasingly in services. It will not be possible to follow the East Asian model of using export-oriented, labor-intensive manufacturing as your engine of poverty reduction and growth. Africa is making the transition to middle and hopefully high income status in the digital age, and the strategies for providing opportunities to citizens will need to reflect that. A new social contract that provided citizens with support to engage in the digital economy, enabling them to do so in the formal sector, providing public services such as health and education that are digitally enabled, and encouraging people to work and pay taxes for as long as possible to contribute to the common good. That, I think, is the basis for a new social contract in Africa. And for governments, that means making sure everyone, from farmers to physicians, have access to the skills and the tools they need to seize opportunities in the digital age. In the beginning of the COVID crisis, many people spoke of the dichotomy between lives and livelihoods. And then we learned that there is no trade-off. The two are completely intertwined. I think a better social contract in Africa would provide security for all lives and opportunity for all livelihoods. Thank you very much.